Hola, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Welcome to today's CURED Charla. On behalf of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, we would like to thank you and the CURED documentary team, ARP, and all of you all for joining this important discussion of the award-winning documentary CURED. CURED takes viewers inside the David-versus-Goliath battle that led the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its manual of mental illness in 1973. This film highlights the bravery and path-breaking contributions of LGBTQ plus pioneers while demonstrating that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, determined individuals can work together to create long-lasting social change. So before we get into the panel discussion and charla, let's kick off by watching a brief clip of the documentary.
If you were gay in those days, you were diagnosed as suffering from a mental disorder. Like so many people in my generation, I went to psychoanalysis to be cured.
These are some of the methods doctors employ to cure homosexuality: electroshock therapy, hysterectomies on lesbians, castrations of gay men.
People use psychiatry as a reason to discriminate. Apart from the discrimination against us, it gave us a horrible image of ourselves.
In the early 1970s, there was this growing rebellion against psychiatry, and we wanted to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
The body of knowledge which claims sickness for homosexuality has to be challenged.
We could not expect our civil rights as long as we were burdened with the sickness label.
Maybe it makes you feel good to be able to say that we are sick. Does it make you feel good?
The body of medical evidence suggests that it is a mental aberration.
There were so many of us that were at the same point. Enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Period.
A number of psychiatrists talked about, why don't we organize, we can make an impact. John Fryer took a step as being the first psychiatrist to say, I'm a gay person, but no one recognized him. He represented all the people who were hiding and invisible.
The effect was electric.
At psychiatric annual meetings, there were demonstrations, if not in fact riots. Ron Gold's a gay activist. He got up there and he yelled out, "Stop it,
You're making me sick." I told them in my speech, you don't have the right to decide that perfectly happy people are sick.
This fight was the most important moment in gay liberation history.
Wow, that's very, very important, and thank you so much to your documentary team for having this be available to us and to our HHF's network. So if you all have not had a chance to watch the film yet, do not worry. You still have until Monday, thanks to the CURED documentary team who extended the exclusive viewing until Monday, September 6th. So to access the film, you will be receiving the link via email, but then also our team members will be embedding it in the chat box. So feel free to watch it when you have some time. Again, you'll have till Monday, September the 6th. Additionally, it will be airing on PBS on October 11th. So at this time, I would like to remind you all that we have the chat and Q&A features enabled. We want everyone to join the conversation, so please make sure to send your chats to all panelists and attendees. So now it's an honor to introduce our panelists. Joining us today, we have Patrick Simone, who is a co-producer and co-director of CURED, along with LA-based filmmaker Bennett Singer. Patrick is a resident of Washington, D.C., and he previously served as a creator and executive producer of Codebreaker, an award-winning drama documentary about the life and legacy of gay British codebreaker Alan Turing that reached more than 3 million views worldwide. It's an honor, Patrick. And joining them, we have Reverend Magora Kennedy, who has been fighting for social justice for more than 5 decades, an active participant in the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and the movement for LGBTQ equality. She is an original member of the Black Panther Party who describes herself as the gayest great-grandmother out of the closet you'll ever meet. A resident of New York City and a member of the National Action Network, she is a Stonewall veteran who is working on a book called Shades of Stonewall. Reverend Kennedy is also featured in a new exhibit and book called Not Another Second, which tells the story of 12 LGBT seniors. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and it's an honor to be sharing this panel with you all and this space with you all. I would like to open up the panel discussion by asking you, Patrick, what was the catalyst for CURED, and why did you want to tell this story?
Well, Jessica, thank you for the question, and thank you to Hispanic Heritage Foundation for hosting this along with AARP. We really appreciate everyone's interest in the film and learning more about it today. It's great to be with you. This has been more than a 5-year journey to get this film made. A friend of mine back in 2014 asked me to look at a film script he'd written. His name is Charles Francis, and he's the head of the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C., which back in its early days, Frank Kameny started in the 1950s, who's one of the heroes from the film. Well, my friend Charles restarted the organization about 10 years ago. It's focused on LGBT history. So he'd written this film script about Frank Kameny, and I read through the script. And one of the scenes in it is the 1972 APA annual meeting in Dallas, where the man in the mask, Dr. John Fryer, has to dress in disguise in order to testify what it's like to be a gay psychiatrist. I was familiar with this story, but that scene in my friend's script sort of jumped out at me as something that would make an amazing documentary. So at that point, I embarked on this journey. I recruited my friend and now colleague, Bennett Singer, to join me on this odyssey. And it's been so incredible to meet the people like Reverend Kennedy, who were so instrumental in bringing about this victory. And that was really the first order of business, was to understand how many people who participated in this struggle were still around. And we were thrilled to track down so many people like Reverend Kennedy, who were excited to share their stories and really be recognized for the importance of this fight. Because that was one of the surprises as Ben and I jumped into this story, is we knew it was a critical moment, but I'm not sure we realized how central it was in the fight for equality. Because as long as we were classified as mentally ill, then business and government were going to use it as an excuse to discriminate. So we got started and really started uncovering layers of this onion, this story, to figure out, like layers of an onion, unpeeling the pieces and figuring out how to stitch it together, and really were humbled to be able to tell this story and capture the stories like Reverend Kennedy. And we were able to find Reverend Kennedy because our archival producers, and I know we'll talk more about it during the discussion, but they found this archival clip from the David Susskind show, and we saw Reverend Kennedy on it and thought, boy, let's see if we can find her. And so we were so thrilled to be able to track her down and have her as such a central part of this film.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely important to be highlighting and sharing this. So it's an honor to have Reverend Kennedy join us. And Reverend Kennedy, I understand from the film that your mother was so troubled by the idea of having a lesbian daughter that she gave you the choice of going to a mental institution or getting married at the age of 14. Was it legal for a 14-year-old to get married? What was that like, facing just such a terrible choice, from your mother?
Well, as far as legality goes, in those days, parents had the say-so over their children, period. And so there was no, there was no recourse. There's nothing to fall back on. My mother was, she was very troubled at the fact that the story was going around Saratoga that, I was chasing the girls, and she said, you will get married or we will put you in Utica. Now, Utica upstate, and for those that are up around the tri-state area, know good and well that Utica upstate New York is like Bellevue here in New York. It's a mental institution. Had my mother been placed, had I not consented to get married, I would have been placed in Utica and probably had a hysterectomy and never would have been the mother of 5 sons, the grandmother of 15 grandchildren and 17 great-grandchildren and 2 great-great-grandchildren. So yes, I am the gayest great-grandmother out of the closet. And this was one of the things that was held over a lot of our heads. A lot of my friends were able to go in the convent. Some of the fellows, they ran away and joined the service or became priests. I tried the same thing. I was able to pass Air Force tests in Albany and was shipped to Waco, Texas. Now I had had upgraded aids. They didn't, in those days, they didn't require much information, but I was able to pass the test. And everybody was shocked when they found out I was only 14 years old. My mother had a private detective find me, and I spent exactly 14 days in the Air Force in Waco, Texas. On the way back to Saratoga and on the way back to Albany Airport, she said, "You will get married in June. I have a husband for you." My only one-upsman on her was that I would come back and forth between Saratoga and New York because my father's mother and father lived here in New York, and I would go to churches and stuff. And I happened to pass by this church, and this music, I heard music like you'd hear in the disco. And we went in, and I started going there, and lo and behold, they were getting ready to put the minister out because he was not married. So I thought we had struck a deal. He gets married, he keeps the church, So I called my mother, and told her this elaborate story. Oh, I found a minister. I'm getting married. I'm in love. And of course, she was thrilled. And the fact that he was a minister was like, for her, over the moon. Long story short, though the marriage was consummated, the marriage was annulled and probably saved Mama from going to Saratoga County Jail. But I felt betrayed. And over the years, it was like the anger that I had that fueled me to the women's movement, and also the fact that I was very, very much involved in the civil rights movement. And I was doing my little nonviolence thing. I went on voter registration in the South to help Black people register to vote. And lo and behold, I found out that nobody makes an X the same. This is how those people were able, really to keep people from voting or guessing how many jelly beans was in a jar and all like that. But nobody made an X the same. Long story short, I was going along. I was doing nonviolence. I was on doing a gospel radio show in Boston over the radio, when it came across that they had assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King. That was the end of my nonviolence. So me, 2 of my sons, we joined the Black Panther Party. I was through nonviolence.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Reverend Kennedy, and for just your courage and representation. And we're just so honored to have you today. I would like to ask Patrick if you could share a little bit more about the production process, including the search for archival materials. How long did it take you to make the film? What are some of the most notable discoveries you encountered during the course of your research?
Yeah, it was quite an odyssey. My co-director, Bennett Singer, likes to joke that at the start of this process, we described the film to people. We want to make a documentary about meetings and conferences, which does not sound very compelling, but we really weren't sure what the visual elements would be there. I mean, first we had the part of, okay, let's see how many people who were involved in this are still around. So that was the first order of business. And so we tracked down Ron Gold, was the first person we interviewed in the spring of 2015. And he unfortunately passed away about 6 months later. And that really reinforced for us the urgency to tell this story, because so many of the storytellers were at an advanced age. And unfortunately, during the production, we've had 5 of the people we interviewed in the film passed away. So we really are humbled that we've been able to capture these recollections and share this story. So on the one hand, we had the sort of storytellers, which we were able to interview. And we really started doing those interviews before we had raised much money, because we knew it was urgent to get these recollections recorded on camera. And then we had the visual elements. And it really is like sort of a scavenger hunt where you're trying to figure out, how do we stitch together the pieces to tell the story? And we had a team of archival producers, Murdu Chandler and Luann Jones, and they really scoured the world to figure out what visual elements were out there. And, online is great, but, to the young people out there, not everything can be found online. So you actually have to go and visit archives. So Bennett and I visited a dozen of them in person. everywhere from more upstate New York. I visited Cornell University for the archives there. I visited archives in San Francisco and Los Angeles, of course, in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress. One of the great discoveries we made was the audio recording of Dr. Anonymous, John Fryer. You know, at the start of this, we knew there was his handwritten speech, but it was not known that there were an audio recording of this speech. So Bennett and I actually discovered that during a week-long visit to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. That's where John Fryer's family donated his materials after he died in 2003. And there were 217 boxes, and we didn't make it through every box, but we did pick out the ones from the finding aid. And in one of these boxes, we're picking through it, and there's a shoebox that's labeled miscellaneous audio. And we had to find a tape recorder. It was one of these old tape machines, and Bennett played through the cassette, and he was afraid he was going to break it because, you know, the tape is old. And John Fryer was an organist, so he listened to organ music and listened to foreign language tapes that John had been interested in learning other languages. And out of these dozens of tapes and an unlabeled tape, we find the audio recording of this speech, which really brings this moment to life. It's great to have the speech, but we would have probably had an actor do a voiceover and record it in that way. But it was just remarkable to hear his voice. And, you know, if you've seen the film, you see that you can hear the courage in his voice, but also the worry. And it really adds so much to the film. So there were so many examples like that where we pieced together the story. One of my favorites is near the end of the film, ahead of the vote, the referendum that happens from the APA members. There's a visual of the ballot that the APA members used in 1974. And that was actually a 2-year hunt for that ballot. And we could have made the film without it, but I just love seeing that there. And that was really courtesy of the APA themselves, the APA Foundation. They have these archives, and you know, some organizations try and run from their history, and I think, you know, particularly dark parts of an organization's history, and in this case, the APA really stepped forward and said, we're glad that you're making this film, and they were helpful in opening their archives, and not really certain what they would find or what we would find, because they're not necessarily that well organized. I know they're working to make them better organized, but the archivist at the APA was so helpful to us, and she ended up finding that ballot for us. And I could bore all of you with a long discussion about various pieces of the film, but it's just a long way of saying it's really hard to make a film like this that's based in history, and you don't know the historical pieces that are out there. But it's really so important to tell this history, to preserve it now before time fades. And so we hope we've done justice to the people like Reverend Kennedy who achieved this victory.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for sharing. You know how it was putting it together, and we have someone in the chat saying history hunter. So definitely, you know,
I'm gonna remember that term. I love it, history hunters.
Yeah, and talking about the film, I know there in one of the most electrifying moments in the film, Reverend Kennedy came when you confronted David Sunskind on national TV. Can you please take us back to that moment of resistance? What were you feeling? What led up to the confrontation with the talk show host?
Well, first of all, that was the first time that out lesbians were on national TV, you know. But prior to that, before going in studio, David Susskind, he came sauntering through, you know, on the way to the studio, kind of like with his nose up in the air. And so Dr. Barbara Giddings and her group, and I was there with them, she extended her hand to David Susskind. And that clown, excuse the expression, he reluctantly shook her hand and then took a towel and wiped his hand after shaking her hand. I mean, that infuriated me. And of course, Dr. Giddings, she kind of turned red in the face. And I said, don't worry about it. He just looked, he never even spoke to me. He just looked me up and down and kept walking, you know. So racism being systemic as it was then, and it unfortunately still is today. And so I said, don't worry, We gonna get him. I don't know how we gonna get him, but we gonna get him. We get on stage and we're on, we're in the studio and he's going on and on about men and women and men and women belong together and how can a woman love another woman and blah, blah, blah. Finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. And so, of course, I am a preacher. And of course, back in those days, you didn't have all this, these mics and whatnot. So I said to him, my best friend, well, does it make you feel good to do? And he jumped and dropped all of his papers. Barbara Giddings and her group, they laughed. We all laughed our behinds off at him. And of course, immediately they go to break or they go to commercial. So he's so flustered, he's trying to get himself together, which he could not do. And, the taping went on, but anyway, we got him. I said, see, told you, gotcha.
And thank you so much for standing up and sharing that story. And I'm glad that we're able to share that, right? Just the resistance and being able to stand up, especially in TV, right? So as we're exploring more of the film and Patrick, unlike many historical documentaries, CURED does not include the voices of historians or experts or a narrator for that matter. Why did you choose to tell the story without experts?
Well, yeah, it was a process. I should start by saying that even though there are no historical experts on camera, we did rely on a really fantastic group of historians and experts on this story. People who've written books about it, people who are experts on the history of psychiatry, people who are experts in other areas. So we really had about a dozen people who were offering advice along the way, looking at versions of the film as the editing process continued. And we actually interviewed a few of those people on camera, but credit to the editor, Steve Hefner. And Steve, unfortunately, passed away in May after a courageous battle with cancer. But his heart and soul is in this film, and he deserves so much credit for the way it turned out. And Steve kept telling Ben and I, how about you just let the interviewees who were there tell the story, because ultimately they are the experts, the best experts on what happened here. And in fact, that was one of the slogans that the activists used during their battles with the APA. They would say to the mental health professionals, we are the experts on our lives. And so much of the science that was used to justify the mental illness label was not actually relying on the viewpoints of LGBT people. And so this was such an important theme. Let the experts tell the story. And so at the end of the day, Bennett and I, with nudging from our editor, Steve, decided, yes, let's have people like Reverend Kennedy and the other folks who were there, like Dr. Silverstein and Kayla Husen, take us through this story, because that would really make it the most engaging possible. And so we had the benefit of the expertise from the sideline, offering guidance along the way, but really just letting the interviewees tell the story. When we started off, we knew that we didn't want to have a narrator, but it just was a matter of whether we would interject with these present day historians. And at the end of the day, I think we made the right decision to let, the storytellers take us through this story. And one of the challenges as filmmakers was everyone knew what the outcome was, right, when you sat down to watch this film. But I think our goal was to create this drama, that the outcome wasn't inevitable. And that was one of the things we wanted to convey, because when people like Reverend Kennedy started this battle, probably 95% of APA members would have thought that homosexuality was a mental illness. So it was not inevitable. So much of history, we assume reading it, it's easy to think, well, that was always going to be the outcome. But we know, of course, that's not the case. History happens because of the courageous individuals who step forward and try to press for change. And no outcome is guaranteed, as we all know, and it takes courageous action from individuals to bring about the change that we want.
Absolutely. And that's what we're so honored to have Reverend Kennedy, and now everything can be amplified through social media, right? We have our phones, computers, and we're just more interconnected more than ever. So Reverend Kennedy, as someone who has been fighting for racial justice as well as LGBTQ equality for decades, what lessons do you think we can draw from the film about the process of bringing about lasting social change?
Well, one of the things that I hope that people take away from the film is that we are all human. I always say that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience. And in that, learning to accept and love your children who are gay and transgender. And the struggle continues because now I urge every parent, person possible to get in touch with your congresspeople and elected officials so they can overturn conversion therapy, because this is one of the things now. This is a struggle, and young transgendered people being subjected to this. And another thing is I hope that where it's possible in states that young gay people can become emancipated minors and don't have to be subjected to their parents, like I had to be subjected to my mother, who insisted on marrying me off. So those are the things that kind of stick with me. And also that today, voter suppression it affects everybody: gay people, straight people, white, black, blue, or green. If this thing goes through, it's a virus. And if this virus continues to spread, it started in Texas and has already been picked up by 20 states, we all are going to be in trouble. Gay, straight, whatever. These laws have to be changed, and the struggle continues. And I hope people wake up and realize what is at risk at this time. We just came back from voter suppression march on voter suppression in Washington, D.C. last Saturday with Reverend Al Sharpton and National Action Network, of which I'm one of the founders and the first openly gay person in that organization. So it's all to me, and to see this today, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ people fighting together, women's right, and this whole thing about Roe versus Wade. We're all in this together, and the struggle continues. These things must be overturned.
Absolutely, we're all in this.
Sorry, just to continue with Reverend Kennedy's point, I think one of the things that we hope that this film does is that it really gives people a roadmap about how to bring about social change. It isn't just a story from the 1970s. It's a story that can offer a roadmap. And one of the things that we find, Ben and I found so striking in making the film, is that the success of activists like Reverend Kennedy was really a mix of insiders and outsiders. You had people like Reverend Kennedy putting pressure from the outside, but then you had people like Dr. Silverstein and Dr. Hartman and Dr. Pillard, who are working from inside the APA. You needed the outside pressure and that energy from the street, but then you also needed the people who could navigate the halls of power and sort of sort through the bureaucracy that was the APA. The outside energy wouldn't have been enough alone, and also the inside sort of operators wouldn't have been able to do what they did without the outside pressure. And so I think that's a lesson. It's really how the path to equality has happened in the LGBT civil rights movement. And I know in other social change movements as well. You need the outside energy and you need the inside maneuvering and action.
Absolutely. And just the last question before we end this amazing panel with you all is, and you all briefly touched upon it, but what lessons do you hope viewers will take away from the film, and why is this story relevant now?
Well, I'll go first, and then Reverend Kennedy. I know, just building off what Reverend Kennedy said about conversion therapy. If you look at the roots of conversion therapy, it started in the mid 70s, right after the APA had made its decision. And conversion therapy today still harms thousands of people every year. I think research shows that 700,000 Americans have been through, quote, conversion therapy, which is faith-based or psychological methods that are used to, quote, cure people, change their sexual orientation or gender identity. We know it doesn't work. We know that it causes serious psychological harm. We know that it causes an increase in the rate of suicide and suicide attempts. It's horrible. And the research we know shows that. One of the good things now, though, is that all of the medical organizations like the APA are now on our side. Back in the early 70s, when Reverend Kennedy was fighting the APA, they were the opponents and now they're the allies. People like, the APA today is led, as the film shows, by an openly gay psychiatrist, and that demonstrates the progress that's been made. And we've been doing other outreach screenings like this. We've, I think, now done 75, and many of them have been focused on the need to ban conversion therapy, as Reverend Kennedy was alluding to. 20 states have banned it for minors, but it's still allowed in 30 states. And so we hope this film can be an educational tool so that people understand this history, and that history can help inform people about the change that needs to happen in this area still today.
Thank you, Patrick. Reverend Kennedy, would you like to share any lessons that you hope viewers take away from the film, and why the story is relevant now?
The biggest thing that on to what Patrick said, this conversion therapy it's horrible and it needs to be changed. And hopefully, it's ironic that 20 states have gone for voter suppression, and 20 states have overruled conversion therapy. So you talk about a 2020 situation. The struggle continues. It's of the utmost importance that young people and their parents learn that, again, we are all human. These things are not good and they must be changed. And the struggle continues. We can't, we can't stop. We won't stop. We're not going to let nobody turn us around. And the young people, I say to them, and their parents, first of all, love yourself, live your truth, and laugh in the face of adversity, and everything else will fall into place. Stay focused, stay woke.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kennedy, for joining us, and Patrick Samet. And I do want to highlight that we do have access to the CURED documentary to HHF and on our network until Monday, September 6th. So thank you so much for the CURED documentary for extending this exclusive viewing to our network. Our team will be embedding the link in the chat for you all to access and view this powerful documentary. Please feel free to have your family and friends, watch. It is going live, as I mentioned, on PBS on October 11th. So once again, thank you, Reverend Kennedy and Patrick, for joining us. We will, just want to highlight here at HHF, we believe that the voices of those in the LGBTQ community need to be highlighted, not only in June for Pride Month, but throughout the year. So we're excited and honored to hear these stories from members of the HHF family. So without further ado, to kick us off, we have Larry Villegas Perez, who is the owner of VP Solutions. Thank you so much, Larry, for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. So first I want to say thank you, because very few times we have an opportunity to have people like Reverend Kennedy to speak from not only the heart, but also the experience, and people to also document those stories for the future to come. It is very important to me, this topic, and that's why I put the name of it, ex-gay programs do not work, because although I very rarely speak about this because it's very private, I was in an ex-gay program for 8 years. And I'm talking about 8 years of no movies, no bars, even though I don't drink, no dancing, nothing, I'm telling you. For 8 years, I dedicated my life to not only self-improvement, but working in the community and religious activities and praying and doing everything that would keep me away from anything else that would remind me that I was a sexual being as one of my identities. And one of the most important things was that I would pray all the time for God to either destroy me or do something that would actually make me think that who I was could change. And I tried to get married, and I tried so many things, but it never worked. I almost committed suicide because I lived in a place that did not allow me to be who I wanted to be, who I felt that I was going to be since I was a kid, because I knew exactly who I was. I was different. And never until my parents discovered something different in me, they took the chance to taking me to a psychologist and a psychiatrist who actually helped me understand the process that I was going through, and then gave me several books for me to read. So for many, 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 many years, since elementary school, well, high school, and even college, I kept myself enclosed, sheltered, protected from everything else until I said, okay, nothing is happening. Nothing is changing. I have the same feelings. I have the same attraction. So what's it going to be? So if God is not destroying me, that means that God is approving what I'm doing. So what I did was, okay, let's do this. Let's go ahead and live a life like God wanted me to live. And that's when, HIV and AIDS was already out and about, and people were crazy about it. And it was even called homosexual cancer. So if you were not a homosexual anymore, you would not get the cancer, and you would not be outed by a disease. So imagine everybody growing up in Latin American countries anywhere, or even here for that matter, in the 70s or 80s, 90s even, thinking about everybody's telling you that you are sick, that you shouldn't exist, that you should be eliminated. And when I started coming to the US to study, to travel, to try to be who I was, it wasn't that easy because I still had that weight here on top of me, telling me, reminding me. And then I studied psychology because I as a nurse, I was before a nurse. And with nursing, I paid for 2 degrees in psychology. And I said, you know what, fuck this. And I'm sorry about my, language, but it is important to raise awareness so people don't go around and telling others that you are a mistake of nature and you should be eliminated. So I was grateful because I came to Washington, D.C. I was grateful because I had an opportunity to visit several cities in the US that took me to tell my story. And I clearly remember there was a group of gay people who came to Washington, D.C. in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were talking about a cure. And I called the Washington Blade and I said, listen, those methods do not work because I was in one and it didn't work. So I don't know if you want to hear my story. 30 minutes later, I had somebody from the Washington Blade call me, interviewed me, took pictures. And then I went to the beach. I came back and I said, well, let me look, at the end of the newspaper, what they said about my interview. No, it was the front page. After that, I was invited to go to the Christina show, which is like the Latino opera, Blonde in Miami. And I even went to the Padre Alberto show also to speak about the rights of people, including transgender individuals in the late 90s, where I said everybody should have the life they want to live, because at the end of the day, what it should matter to the government is that everybody pays taxes. So you leave your people alone and everybody would pay taxes happily. So this is very close to me. I support every day from the Office of Human Rights, where I also work, anything that happens to people. I am ready, willing, and able. That's why I became a mental health practitioner. That's why I am out every opportunity I can to talk to people to love themselves. We all were born with equal rights and with an opportunity to fully participate in the economic, cultural, and intellectual life, not only in the District of Columbia, but in the world. And I am going to close by using one quote from the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who said, "We declare that human rights are for all of us, all the time, whoever we are and wherever we are from, no matter our class, our opinions, our sexual orientation," and I add, either gender expression. Love ourselves, love yourself, love your neighbors. And for everything, when everything else disappears, respect should be the code. And with that, I thank you very much for the opportunity and the time.
No, muchas gracias a ti, Larry. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story. I do see folks in the chat, sending their love, but I do see some of them also asking to reach you. So any way that our community can reach you and get that support from you as a mental health practitioner, I know that would be greatly appreciated. Gracias, Larry. Next up, we have Taylor Chandler, who is a transgender health coordinator, Flux 8 Healthcare Foundation DC president at Us Helping Us and People into Living and Incorporated. Thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us.
My pleasure. I believe I have a PowerPoint. There we go. I was born in the 70s, in 72, and I clearly remember that, people didn't even talk about gay people, let alone any other, hang on. Oh, sorry. Can you see me now? I don't know what happened. So I was born in 72, and like I was saying, people didn't even talk about sexual orientation, let alone gender variance. I was born intersex, and because of living in that binary world, they did gender mutilation surgery on me to fit in a binary world. Well, as soon as I could walk and talk, we realized that they'd clearly made a mistake. And, I grew up being who I am. I don't know anything else. No one knows me as anything else. My birth certificate name were all changed as a minor. There wasn't the word transgender back then. And, I left home and emancipated. And, I embarked on a journey to kind of do anything and everything I wanted to do because I didn't know how the world saw me. And I had the privilege of living stealth at that time. Next slide. So on September, I'm going to fast forward. So for 41 years, I lived stealth. I did not tell my friends. I did not tell the people I dated. I know a lot of people don't agree with me with that, but that was how I chose to do things. And on September 30th, the person that I was dating at the time got a DUI. And in that moment, a lot of press and media, and, nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. And it just became so much bigger than life. In the beginning, in the media, they said, I was a model type, tall. Then when they found out how old I was, I became a cougar. Because I was a sign language interpreter working on the Hill and at the White House at the time, seeing my license plate, my credentials were with the state. It was all public knowledge. So people actually got access to me very quickly. And then the gentleman that I was dating left for rehab in the beginning of October, leaving me kind of alone to deal with all this. Supposedly his management team, Drew, Peter, and Rick were going to be there for me. And in the beginning, it seemed like they were, but they really weren't. And so the next slide. So on November 14th, the world found out who I was across magazines, newspapers. entertainment shows, news, sports channels, it kind of rang around the world that Michael Phelps was, his girlfriend was born a man, which I always say my mother's poor uterus. But, you know, I had never been associated with labels or anything. All of a sudden, my entire life, good, bad, ugly, became public. And my most intimate parts of my life became public due to my phone being hacked while Michael and I were together during that time period around the DUI. And, you know, I think about how the film seems to talk about how bad things were then. And sometimes I think they're still just as bad now. It's just we talk about it and hate is more pronounced. They weaponized me. They made it seem like Michael Phelps dating me made him gay and that was a bad thing. And why we think that way is beyond me. Next slide, please. So as you can see, you know, I feel like we continually take 2 steps forward and 100 backwards. The one good thing that came from everything that happened, it redirected my life. I decided to use my platform to fight and elevate voices that needed to be heard. So, you know, I pretty much exclusively work in elevating Black and brown lives because Black trans women are the ones being murdered. And I feel like it's my responsibility to use my white privilege and the advantages I have, the platform that I have to elevate these lives. So as you can see, there's very little that I don't get involved with. And luckily now, for the first time in my life, I'm married to someone that knows everything about me and I have no secrets. And I live my life full view, front facing for everybody. And I'm okay with that. You know, people still call me to things because of, you know, the sensationalism of who I dated. But the reality is, as long as you're willing to talk about the work I do and talk about TGNC youth being homeless or at risk, getting workforce development, getting housing, getting access to healthcare, getting equity. I love the Equality Act, but so many of us are still knocking at the door. Protections aren't going to help us if we don't have a job, you know, if we don't have housing, if we don't have healthcare. And during COVID and everything, you know, we've taken it a step further with PPEs and food deliveries, all in Ward 7 and 8 here in DC, which are the most marginalized and vulnerable. So I thank you so much for having me and being able to share my story. And I hope that everyone, even if you can touch one life, can do so to make a difference in their life, because it takes a village. And I thank you, the Reverend, and I thank the other gentleman, I forget his name, that, you know, has created this movie. I think these stories still, I know they still hold true today, and it's important we have these conversations. So thank you for having me.
No, thank you, Taylor, for joining us and for sharing your story and for your activism and supporting our community. Up next, we have Guillermo Creamer, who is a candidate for City Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Guillermo.
Thank you so much for having me. The Hispanic heritage family is very close to me, so I'm really happy to be here. You know, my name is Guillermo. I am a proud Peruvian Chilean. I was born here in the United States, but my Latinidad is very much at the forefront of who I am. But I'm also an openly gay man. And you know, now being in this position of running for office and making sure that that's like out there is, I think, one of the most important things I could have done. So you know, coming out is different for everyone. And in my case, I lived in a household where I had kind of 2 different cultures. I had the Peruvian culture, the Chilean culture, and I had a third one, which was the American culture that I grew up in. And so I always knew who I was. I always knew, you know, what was happening. But in this case, it was difficult to, to have my parents embrace who I was fully. And so when I first came out, it was a difficult challenge, but I will say, I know you hear this a lot, but the whole "it gets better" thing, it worked in my case. I was really grateful for the progress that my parents have made. But the reason why I wanted to speak to all of you today was because, I am unapologetically myself. My announcement video included that I was an openly gay man, and I live in central Massachusetts, and for many, Massachusetts is this progressive oasis. And the reality is that while it is a blue-leaning state, there are still very much conservative values that exist in different municipalities throughout the state. And Worcester is not an exception, to be honest. And so being an openly gay man, I decided to just make sure that that was out right up front. And it's how I introduce myself, usually within the first minute that I talk to a new potential voter. And I do that because I'm the type of person that believes that we need to get discomfort in order to create comfort. And so we have to just kind of rip off the Band-Aid and we move on from it. Most of the time I won't actually say like, oh, I'm a gay man. Like I'll just say, oh, my partner, he goes here, and it's just very easy and subtle in my case. But the reality is that LGBTQ people in Massachusetts are still fighting for some things. And so, Worcester has never had an LGBTQ person elected in office, even though it has a rich LGBTQ history. And I think that these firsts are so important to kind of break through that ceiling and ensure that we're creating pathways for others. My hope isn't to be just the first and the last, it's to make way for the next. And so to me, ensuring that we're talking to our voters directly and just getting it out of the way and being able to connect with them directly for other things is so important to me. But I wanted to come on and talk to you all about how important it is to not just look at the federal elections out there, but there are a lot of municipal elections that are happening throughout the country. And some people aren't paying attention to them. And we are trying to elect LGBTQ candidates up and down the ballot, and that includes the municipal level, and it only can create a rainbow pathway up to the top. And so that's the big hope here. But I just wanted to kind of share my story really briefly, and hope that if you're interested in kind of seeing what an out candidate is like when they're running for municipal office, feel free to reach out on Twitter. I'm at Guillermo for Woo. But thank you so much for having me on. Gracias.
Gracias, Guillermo. If you could add your handles in this chat, I'm sure a couple of our audiences would like to stay in touch. And to close this off, we have Renzo Reyes, who is a management consultant at Accenture and the author of Do It Anyway When They Say You're Not Enough. Thank you for joining us, Renzo.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Renzo. I actually interned with HHF over 5 years ago. So it's really just incredible to be back here with the HHF Familia. Thank you so much, HHF and Tony, for having me here today. Thank you, Reverend Kennedy and Patrick, for being with us today, and for all of the speakers for sharing your lived experiences. Taylor, Guillermo, Larry, thank you so much. Very powerful stories. So just a little bit about me before I get into it. I was born in Peru as well, raised in Maryland, and lived as undocumented for most of my life here. I attended Georgetown for undergrad, and now I'm back in Maryland living with my husband of almost 4 years and our beautiful dog, Kal-El. I'm sure you'll see him in the background here somewhere at some point. So today I will actually be reading to you all an excerpt related to my experiences as a gay man from my upcoming book, Do It Anyway When They Say You're Not Enough, soon to publish this December. And I have yet to actually share this particular chapter with anyone outside my publishing team. So I hope that you all enjoy it and really get something out of it. All right. Visiting the doctors without any health insurance was bad enough, as I knew my parents always took a financial hit just to have their teenage son checked up for any potential health concerns. Nevertheless, anytime I did go, I deferred entirely to the medical professionals. I was 15 and naive. If I couldn't trust the doctors, who could I trust? So I don't think anyone would really blame me for once believing the words of a soft-toned, gentle woman about of about 50 or so who, during one visit, after reading my completed health questionnaire on her clipboard and asking my mom to step out, told me that sexual relations should be reserved for marriage and only between a man and a woman. But not before asking me whether I believed in God, to which I slowly nodded my head in confusion due to the relevance of the question. And this would happen again and again every single time I returned to her office for a checkup. When the people who are supposed to help you hurt you, where do you turn? It wasn't until late 2020 that, after many failed searches, I found a therapist of color who both specialized in behavioral counseling for LGBTQ plus individuals and was accepted by my insurance. She was able to provide me with the much needed help I needed to process this previously repressed memory, among other similar ones. The others of this world, be they considered as such by race, gender identity, or sexual orientation, experience what I call an exemplar vacuum. We lack the mentors in the right places to help guide us through the unique difficulties only we experience as members of a certain social group. We lack representation in the media to show us that we're normal, that we're beautiful, and that our experiences matter too. We lack role models in high places to show us it's possible for people like us to reach otherwise unthinkable levels of success. We lack representation in places of power to ease some of the obstacles uniquely presented to us. We lack the accessible knowledge, or accessible sources of knowledge to show us the parts of our culture worth celebrating. Without these exemplars, we don't recognize our potential. We don't know what we're capable of, and we don't learn about ourselves. Worse yet, we learn about the problematic parts of what we're taught. And even if we do manage to be all of these things, we don't have the same resources afforded to our default peers to fulfill that potential. So our cultural past is murky or inaccessible, our present needlessly more challenging, and our future seemingly less bright than our peers. I read this excerpt to you all to encourage my fellow members of the LGBTQ plus community who are willing and able to put yourselves out there to do it anyway. Whatever it is for you, whatever dream you have to achieve, it's very easy to get caught up in all of the negativity of the world, especially in today's age. The way that you feel is valid, your lived experiences are valid, and your pain is valid. Take the time that you need to process it. But whenever you're ready, pick yourself back up and get out there. Pursue the things that you want to pursue. Chase the dreams that you want to chase in the ways that only you know how. Make your voice heard, inspire others, and make change. Together, let's show our LGBTQ plus siblings who are in a dark place that we are here with them and for them. Let's show them that we are resilient. We are a community capable of greatness so that they know that one day they can get out there and do it anyway too. Let's show them that we are and will always be proud, and we will continue to shine bright even in the darkest of places. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Renzo. And we will be having a Q&A session up next. So for those of you, please submit your questions in the Q&A window found at the bottom of the Zoom bar. We will, the first question we have here is from, I know we still have Patrick online. So a question, Patrick, is if you can share a little bit about did the DSM change impact psychiatric organizations and society in other countries? How did the APA's decision impact the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, thank you. And what amazing presentations. Thank you for sharing the stories. Really, really powerful and moving. Thank you. Yeah, it was a huge impact around the world. The APA was and is the largest and most influential organization of psychiatrists around the world. And it, as we've been told, it certainly had an impact on psychiatry around the world. Unfortunately, though, it wasn't until 1990 that the World Health Organization took homosexuality off of its list of mental illnesses. And as we've tried to understand why it took so long there, basically we were told, and as we've learned, that the WHO moves more with a carrot approach than a stick approach, trying to build consensus. And so, it took some countries a lot longer to come to that view. So we do know that it certainly had an impact, particularly in more liberal Western or more liberal countries. It had an impact and certainly moved the issue forward in other places.
Thank you, Patrick. And I see we have Reverend Kennedy still on the line. Reverend Kennedy, we have a question is, how has activism changed over the decades? How is activism our community is engaged today different from activism in the 60s and 70s?
I loved what they said, and the young men, and I just would encourage them to keep on, and the stories are absolutely amazing. I am so glad that we've come this far, and we still have a long way to go. And just be encouraged and be enthused, because tomorrow is definitely going to be a better day for all of the young people that are involved. Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Kennedy. So we do have if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A window. The next question, I do have another one, is for Patrick, is what did you see as the smartest, most strategic action taken by the activists and change makers who challenged the APA?
I think the smartest thing was to not get discouraged. As I mentioned earlier, the odds were stacked against these activists, because all of the so-called experts told them they were mentally ill and they were wrong. But in terms of, Dr. Charles Silverstein has talked to me about, one of the things that stuck with me in my conversations with him is they had to know when to use which tactics. One of the key things in the film that we highlight is this meeting in the winter of 1973, where they meet with the committee within the APA that determines what's in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that had to be sort of a collaborative approach. They didn't come in banging their fist on the table and pointing fingers and saying, you have to change this. And there's a time for those kinds of tactics. But what they were thinking about was engaging on their turf, the turf of these experts on this committee within the APA. So they approached it using scientific arguments, laying out the cases as much as they could. And that really had an impact. In fact, Dr. Silverstein told me how after the meeting, the members of the committee said, boy, we were surprised. We thought you were going to come in and start screaming at us. So I think there is a time to scream and yell. And so I think that was the wisest strategic tactic, understanding when to use sort of which technique to move the ball forward.
Thank you for that. That's very wise, Patrick. And I'm sure a lot of folks could apply it in different aspects of their life as well. Renzo, would love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you. What was the driver motivation in terms of writing your book, which I know you shared your information for folks to reach you.
Yes. I have pretty much struggled with a sense of inadequacy for the majority of my life, and I wanted to explore it a little more. For when I was in college, it really one of the terms that resonated with me most was imposter syndrome, and so I actually started out writing the book about that. And then the more research I did, the less that the more that I actually found that it was it wasn't very tied to the concept of identities in the way that I thought that it should be. So I began to explore that. I began to uncover some of those topics, and later kind of discovered what I am calling like internalized inadequacy, which makes up the foundation of the book in terms of how to overcome that. So my hope is really just to help people reprogram it so that it's something that can actually help them and help them achieve their goals instead of hinder them.
Thank you, Renzo. And Taylor, we do have a question for you. Is you went through a very public going through the different kind of, you were in the public and still dealing with with yourself in terms of how to go about being, outed and stuff. What advice would you give our community in terms of dealing with this? I know that this is something that we had a couple of our folks send over in the chat, reaching out to Larry. So anything that helped you along your process that you can share with the community?
Absolutely. First and foremost, find someone that's going to listen, that's going to have empathy. I was in a really bad place. 2015 was really, I wanted to die, most of it. It was really, I felt like my whole identity had been stripped from me, and it was tough, but I sought professional help. I needed someone to talk to. And then that led to a psychiatrist and, getting on medication so I didn't feel everything to extremes. And that was important for me. And, all these years later, I have a great therapist. I have a great psychiatrist. I went through DBT therapy, but I had mentors. I had people in the community that really extended a hand to love me, to show me what chosen family was, and that I didn't have to worry or deal with, what we all deal with online through social media with, these intentional hate campaigns, especially towards kids. There's a new program called Worthy Mentoring, which is an app, and it connects people in partnership with the Trevor Project. And I would encourage anybody thinking of maybe coming out, or that is out but not fully out, to connect with someone. And these are safe spaces and safe people. The mentees, it can be anybody, but the mentors, they go through full background checks and all that good stuff, and they're community. They're the letters underneath the umbrella. And I think it's important to see yourself in somebody else and feel that connection. But at the end of the day, it's just a handheld, a hug, letting someone know you love them and it's going to be okay. I didn't believe that when I was younger, but I'm a woman of a certain age now, and I've come to know it very well.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And thank you to all our speakers, Larry, Taylor, Guillermo, Renzo, Patrick, and Reverend Kennedy, for sharing your personal stories and for joining us today. We also want to thank all of you for joining us today, the CURED documentary team and AARP. Remember, you all have until Monday for early access of the CURED documentary. Teresa from our team is sharing the link in the chat. We will be sharing it as a follow-up via email. It will air on PBS on October 11th, so stay tuned. We hope you all have a safe holiday weekend. Thank you, everyone.